US President Donald Trump declared himself the guardian of the Strait of Hormuz and demanded 20% of the value of all transported goods for this. In fact, what Trump was fighting Iran over, he simply decided to lead. This is a shakedown over shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. Shipping companies really did ask for protection because since the beginning of the war, passing through the strait has become deadly dangerous. And so Donald Trump answered them, "We'll provide protection, but you'll have to pay for it." But he forgot to mention that before his war with Iran, there actually weren't any problems in this strait. But the question is simple: how is this all going to work anyway? How is Donald Trump planning to collect money from ships for passing through the strait? And this is where it gets really interesting, because according to experts' analysis, the answer is this: most likely he can't. Moreover, the president of Brazil, Lula, described it in one simple word, and it's very clear: it's piracy. In this episode, we'll discuss the mechanics, the numbers, the legal dead end, and the main obstacle that Trump apparently didn't even consider. Everything about what happens next in the Strait of Hormuz. Why Trump's idea of a 20% tariff still looks completely unfeasible for now. And whether he will actually be able to seize the entire Strait of Hormuz. My name is Alexi Pecci. Let's discuss this topic, but before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, like this episode, and leave any comment under this video. So let me immediately quote Donald Trump. "The United States of America will from now on be known as the guardian of the Strait of Hormuz. But in this regard, and for the sake of fairness, they will receive compensation amounting to 20% of the value of all transported goods. Yes, to cover any and all expenses necessary to ensure the security of this extremely unstable part of the world." The process and preparations will begin immediately. At the same time, he announced the resumption of the blockade of Iranian ports. And here, the reaction of all the markets was, of course, immediate. Oil prices jumped, now it's already over $80 per barrel. The company's shares, by contrast, fell. Trump has already addressed Congress with a statement that he has once again resumed a full-scale war against Iran. And in this whole situation, the main question arises, well, even if the ship owners agree to pay Donald Trump $20 for passage through the strait, how is all this supposed to work? Trump's idea sounds something like this: "We will escort ships in protected convoys. Want to join? Here's the price. 20% of the value of your cargo." So it's not exactly a toll for passage. Legally, it can be bypassed. It's more like paid protection. That is, American warships escort an entire convoy of tankers through the dangerous zone. And the cargo owners pay for this service, for this kind of protection. Not enough if you don't use it. Let me note right away that Donald Trump didn't come up with anything new. The scheme isn't new in theory. Convoys were used during the tanker war of the 1980s, but there's an important nuance. Back then, the United States of America protected the ships for free because it was in their own interests. Now Trump is proposing to do the same thing for money, and that's where the problems begin. And there are 4 of these problems, actually 5. Let me start with the 5th. The 5th one goes like this. For the ships to need protection they're willing to pay for, there has to be a constant threat in the region. If ship owners are paying for convoys, is there any reason for the United States of America to end the war? After all, then the strait could become safe again, and there would simply be no need for convoys. That means no one would pay for them. That's something to think about. Well, let's go over some other problems. Problem number 1, the price, which most likely no one will pay. As a rule, for context, shippers pay carriers 2 to 3% of the value of the goods as fees. Again, for transporting the cargo, it's 2 to 3% of the value of the cargo itself. Now just compare. Trump demands 20% of the value of the cargo for protection and for transportation. That's nearly 10 times the usual protection cost. The conclusion is straightforward. Such a fee would be completely unaffordable for shippers, or they would be forced to raise the price of the goods for the buyer by exactly 20%. Therefore, the fee will probably be so high that no one will want to pay it, but that's an unrealistic amount. Let's count on our fingers. I've given this example before. Let's try again. A supertanker, one of many that pass through the Hormuz Strait, carries 2 million barrels of oil. At a price of about $80 per barrel, the cargo of this tanker is worth approximately $160 million. 20% is more than $30 million from a single trip. In pre-war times, up to 3,000 such tankers passed through the Strait of Hormuz each month. For comparison, the Iranian fees, which Washington called a racket, were about $2 million per vessel. Trump wants 15 times more. But here's the question. Who in their right mind would give up $30 million just for a single passage? But even if someone is willing to pay that kind of money, there's a second problem that comes up. The final say actually belongs to the insurers. And it seems that Trump didn't think about that at all. Even if there's someone willing to pay, it seems that Trump didn't think about that at all. Even if there's a daredevil willing to pay 20% for passage, it won't be up to him to decide. It won't be the ship owner or even the shipper who decides whether the vessel passes or not. The insurance companies will decide. Why is that? I'll explain. Because insurers can simply refuse to insure ships passing through the Hormuz Strait if they consider the risks too high, regardless of whether the owners are willing to pay for American protection. And without insurance, the ship simply doesn't even set out on its voyage. No bank will finance the cargo, and no charterer will sign a contract if the ship doesn't have insurance. It's just not realistic. The only exception is when, like Russia, they create a shadow fleet. An absolutely illegal fleet that transports Russian oil, and even those ships are still insured, just not by Western companies. If there is no insurance, then no ship will go anywhere. So the American fleet can offer convoys as much as they want, but if the insurance company says no, the convoy won't go anywhere. Military power does not override insurance underwriting. And that's how this business works. Without it, nothing will work. Problem number 3. Most likely this is generally illegal. The Strait of Hormuz is an international waterway where ships have the right of free passage under international law. Iran has previously imposed what it called service charges. Essentially, these were duties. International law does not allow such practices. The problem is that now the United States of America is doing exactly the same thing. And this is the most awkward part. In June, the United States of America and Iran signed a temporary ceasefire agreement, which explicitly prohibits it. Tehran was forbidden to impose any fees on commercial vessels passing through the strait. America itself included this prohibition in the document, and now it is violating it, but only for its own benefit. Moreover, Trump has repeatedly stated that he wants to see the strait free of any duties. However, even before, he sort of hinted that the US could collect them. Well, I have already talked in more detail about the illegality of such an approach, with all the articles and so on, in previous episodes. If you're interested, take a look. I think this episode was released the day before yesterday on this YouTube channel. Problem number 4. There are no details on how all this is supposed to work, not even from Trump and his team. So, okay, hypothetically we assume that all this has started working, but how is it going to work? To decide whether to use this service, companies need to know how much it will cost and how it works. But the White House, for example. Today there was a whole series of requests from journalists for information, but the White House doesn't explain anything to journalists. They just leave these requests unanswered. And as CNBC states, quote, "Much about the proposed compensation policy remains unclear. Who collects the money? How is the value of the cargo assessed? What about ships that don't pay? Will they not be allowed in, or will they be left under missile threat? There are no answers. It seems the process and preparation, which Trump says will begin immediately, currently exist only as his social media post." And then, unexpectedly, the president of Brazil, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, spoke up. His reaction was the most accurate and the most ruthless of all. I'll quote him next. Donald Trump published a post in which he stated that he is going to reopen the Hormuz Strait, but for every ship he allows to pass, the owner of the oil will have to pay him 20%. That used to be called piracy, didn't it? Such an important country as the United States of America, which has fought against piracy for so long, should not now become a pirate itself. He shouldn't charge for it because that strait is not his area of responsibility. And that's the whole essence of the problem. This is probably the main issue, which can't be solved by aircraft carriers, or by Trump's posts, or by assurances of security, or by anything else. The Strait of Hormuz, is not American. America has no sovereignty over it. For decades, it has guarded this strait for free. This is exactly how it built its reputation as a defender of freedom of the seas. This freedom of navigation program was the very argument the US used even against China in the South China Sea. That's exactly why America was called the world's policeman, who enforces order for free. And that's exactly why America has always been the #1 superpower, because it wasn't, a market hustler. It really did defend not only its own interests, but also those of others. And that's what everything was built on. But now Washington is presenting the bill and is destroying its own main argument with its own hands. The result: how will all this work? Questions. According to the plan, according to Trump's plan, American convoys protect and escort the tankers, and the owners pay 20% of the cargo's value. America, according to Trump, gets huge amounts of money. In fact, the price is 10 times higher than the normal cost of just transportation. And according to experts, no one will want to pay it. It's too expensive. Insurers may simply refuse to let ships go to sea, nullifying Trump's entire plan. International law does not provide for such a fee. The White House doesn't have the details on how this is supposed to work, and allies and partners are hearing a word from the president of Brazil that will now stick to this whole story: piracy. And Trump could actually make this word stick to the United States of America. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.